All right, we are live here, everybody. Just going to get my screen oriented here. Just 1 second. Get my volume coordinated. And there. All right. So, everybody, Keaton Weiss here with Russell Dobular. This is the Do Dissidents podcast back at 7 p.m. What's up, Russell?
What's up?
So, I feel like a real idiot because, here we are trying to build out this YouTube channel, right? And we tell everybody to subscribe to the YouTube channel. But one thing I just realized for the first time, I had heard of this thing called the bell, which is next to the subscribe button. There's a bell icon. Apparently, it's very important that you hit the bell icon as well as being subscribed, because being subscribed just means it prioritizes us in the feed, in your YouTube feed. But when you hit the bell next to the subscribe button, that's what notifies you like when we're live or when a video drops. That's where you get the little notification thing on your screen. And that's very important when it comes to live streaming and things like that. So don't just subscribe, but hit the bell.
It also informs the NSA to take a peek.
Hey, we need all the viewers we can get at this point, man.
Yeah.
The NSA wants to watch us. I say, what do we say? We're a big tent here.
Maybe we'll change some minds.
Podcast. Yeah, right. Exactly. Maybe we'll turn some of them.
This is my theory about why you don't see Scientologists in Times Square anymore. I think that trying to send people out to persuade cynical, hardened, smart-ass New Yorkers to become fucking Scientologists, I think they lost more of the people they sent out to recruit people than they actually recruited people. I think they found, you know what? This is counterproductive. Todd never came back. Neither did Susie.
Yeah, that could be. That definitely could be.
I mean, I personally myself think I probably made 3 of them quit.
Oh, really? That's good.
Oh, I made it my personal business every time I saw them, especially if they had some poor bastard on the hook. I would go up to them. I'd say, "Listen, you see Tom Cruise jumping on that couch on Oprah? You ain't got Tom Cruise's money to insulate you from the consequences of that kind of behavior, brother. You do not." So
you would actually go and cock block the recruiters.
Oh, and they would start screaming, and they're trained.
Yeah, well,
they're trained to do this. Sir, I'm exercising my freedom of speech. I'd say, so am I. I don't disagree with your right to do what you're doing right now.
Right, it's a public sidewalk.
Yeah, but I'm going to also exercise my free speech rights. I went up to one of them who actually had a sense of humor, which is unusual for them. I went up to one. I said, Heinlein, Herbert, Asimov, Hubbard? You guys pick Hubbard to worship out of this generation of science fiction writers? Hubbard?
Yeah, Hubbard.
And the guy actually laughed. That was surprised me.
Oh, there you go. Your sci-fi knowledge came in handy there. Got you a laugh.
It did. For years, I would walk by the Scientology Center in Times Square, and I would open the door and yell, "Free Katie! Free Katie!"
Well, I told this joke before, but I always wanted to punk my bus tours, and just when we were passing the Church of Scientology, I always wanted to tell the bus driver, "Hey, pull over." I'm going to say into the mic, "All right, so we're going to come in here, watch a little film." Never could time it, though.
Now I'm going to have to do it.
That would have been great. That would have gone over huge, too,
if I did that bit.
Next time you're doing a bus tour, got to do that. Got to just say, "Hey, pull over here." He doesn't even have to pull over. Just tell the bus driver, "Hey, would you mind pulling over here? We're going to pull over right here on our right-hand side at point so they all see. We're going to watch a little film." Right? And then we'll all come out. Anyway, let's get down to business. We have a few topics here that we have to cover. This episode is going to be more of a victory lap episode here because our first 2 or really 3 topics, I would say, are kind of rehashes of old stories that we got right at the very beginning. All right, and they are related to the war in Ukraine, gas prices, Saudi Arabia, etc. So our first segment of the evening, Joe Biden has actually confirmed his plans to visit the Saudi kingdom and beg the Saudi crown prince to release more oil so that we can buy it, so that gas prices go down. This was announced back in March that he was considering it. I wrote an article, the title of which was, "If Yemeni Lives Matter, Joe Biden Will Not Go to Saudi Arabia to Beg for Oil." But just yesterday, his plans were finalized. And then this morning, they were actually unfinalized, but not canceled. They postponed the trip from later this month into early next month. So they just delayed it. I don't know if that had anything to do with some backlash they've received, if they're reconsidering it.
He has to loosen up his throat muscles. He hasn't sucked that much cock in a while.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, I mean, that's a crude comparison, but not an inaccurate one. In fact, I think Jimmy Dore made the exact same one. I watched a brief video that he did here. And look, the reason why, I would just take a no-holds-barred attitude towards covering this is just because not only the standalone moral obscenity of this, but that you are committing one moral obscenity in order to compensate for this fake moral good that you're trying to pull off in Ukraine and trying to sell the people in Ukraine. Oh, this war in Ukraine, which is killing 60 to 100 Ukrainian soldiers per day. That's soldiers. That's not counting civilians. Soldiers per day. 60 to 100. In Vietnam, we lost about 50 per day. Okay, so no, Ukraine is not winning the war. As we knew Ukraine would not win the war. Ukraine could not win the war. It's Ukraine next to Russia. Just one look at a map will tell you they had no chance to win the war from day one. But now, because that has disrupted everything to the point where gas is now hovering the $8 per gallon mark in Los Angeles, one gas station in California is as high as $10 for regular unleaded gas. Now you have to go and commit this moral crime of begging the Saudis for more oil. All right, and this is something, actually, that Joe Biden himself promised he would not do explicitly. Now, he didn't foresee the war in Ukraine when he was a candidate, or did he not foresee the war in Ukraine when he was a candidate? Seems like everyone in Washington, except Donald Trump, for the last 12 years wanted this war in Ukraine.
Well, those where I was going to say the thing that they're going to cut into the ads if I have to decide I dislike myself enough to run for political office. This is what I liked about Trump. He didn't try to pretend that we're not scumbags. Like if Trump did this, he would have said, "Yeah, well, we need the oil.
Right, we need the oil.
We need the oil. They have
exactly
all the oil there. What do you think we've been dealing with Saudi Arabia all these years for? It's
exactly.
They have the oil there. If they don't have oil there, we wouldn't even talk to them. We maybe to rent a camel or something on a summer vacation." That's
look, as our friend Anis Shivani puts it, right. I mean, as our friend puts it, I wouldn't take credit for this quote myself because I think it's a great phrase. Trump did not traffic in the fake innocence of the U.S. empire. He didn't speak that language. He didn't traffic in that.
We got a lot of killers here.
Yeah, we got a lot of killers here. Exactly. And the reason he covered the Saudi prince when they dismembered an American journalist is precisely for this reason, because he knew that the Saudis owned our asses. And so he needed to give them some sort of plausible deniability for that crime, because if it ever comes out for sure that he did it, then it's going to be this sort of cognitive dissonance that most Americans can't handle, which is they did this to one of our people, yet we are still on good terms with them. Why? Because we have to be. But Joe Biden, like I said, did actually promise to change things as a candidate. So this was a statement by Vice President then Joe Biden on the anniversary of Jamal Khashoggi's murder. This was October 2nd, 2020. All right. I'll just skip the boring pablum here. Under a Biden-Harris administration, we will reassess our relationship with the kingdom and U.S. support for Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen. And here's my favorite, make sure America does not check its values at the door to sell arms or buy oil. We will make sure America does not check its values at the door to sell arms or buy oil. Again, assuming he did not know that this Russia-Ukraine war was going to break out. That was just a lack of foresight on his part. If he did have a feeling, as I suspect everyone in Washington did have a feeling, that this was going to happen as soon as Trump got out of their way, then that was a pretty stupid promise to make. I thought it was only the leftists who overpromise. That was a pretty stupid promise for a centrist, pragmatic Democrat to make. No checking our values at the door to buy Saudi oil. That's a really difficult promise to live up to.
Yes, it is. And as soon as he said it, this is the Machiavellian realpolitik person in me. Hey, you've had 21 years since 9/11 to rally the country around building alternative energy infrastructure so that we wouldn't be where we are Saudi Arabia today. If 9/11 didn't tip you off that maybe we don't want to be this dependent on Saudi oil, nothing was going to do it. But we're here now. We wasted the last 21 years that we should have spent building out that infrastructure. So what do you do now that doesn't hurt working people, because you don't have those alternative energy options in place? So the average person is still driving a car that takes gas. That's the person who's going to get fucked if you decide to get into high moral dudgeon with Saudi Arabia. So, yes, it's the principled thing to do, but it's easy when you can afford gas to have those principles. So on a realpolitik level, I didn't feel like that was really a sustainable policy. It was not a policy we could do. We want a policy like that. We need to build out clean energy infrastructure. You can't just get hard on Saudi Arabia. Hey, I'm not saying we need to be selling them arms to go into Yemen, but you can't really be smacking them around when you have you're writing a check, your ass can't cash. Like, what leverage do you have on them?
Well, no, certainly you can't afford to smack them around. But what I find startling about this is that
statements against them in public. Okay, what do you have to back that up with when you're dependent on their oil?
No, you have nothing to back that up with, but you can avoid situations that make you more dependent on their oil, such as sending $40 billion or now north of $50 billion when you add it all together to prolong a war in Ukraine that antagonizes Russia, which is a major supplier of oil and natural gas. That's the thing. We are committing this moral crime here for the sake of posturing as some moral good with the Russia-Ukraine. That's the ironic thing. And what it's basically saying is that Ukrainian lives matter more than not just the lives of the people in Yemen, but the lives of the people in Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is not just a country that commits terrorism around the world. This is a country that oppresses its own people in the most brutal, horrific ways. And so, that's the thing here, is we're going out of our way to ask them for more oil. I'm not suggesting we should cut them off entirely. We can't, right? As you said, just as real is real. We cannot do that. But but the fact that we're doing this now so that we can look good so that we can look like an ally of Ukraine, that's the thing that's really startling about this, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why to most of the world, any moral posturing America makes is a joke to anyone outside of America. Anyone who is not completely brainwashed by the American media complex, it's a joke when America
because
tries to make pretenses that we are standing up for freedom.
Look, if you're going to do this, don't you have to ask yourself, right? Don't you have to ask yourself at this point, is MBS the moral superior to Vladimir Putin?
No.
Right? I mean, that's the question you have to ask yourself. And the answer is, of course, absolutely not. And so if the answer is absolutely not, then
Putin is a philosopher king compared to Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. But what is the moral calculus here? The only way the moral calculus here works out is if we just sort of decide that white Eastern European Ukrainian lives are more important than the lives made miserable and cut short by the Saudi regime. That's the only way that that moral calculus works. And that's really not a moral calculus, in my opinion, or, in the opinion of anybody, I would argue, who thinks that all life is equally precious.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's literally because of race. I've made this point before. The people who follow the CNN or MSNBC or New York Times narratives, they're just as much a loaded gun waiting to be pointed in any direction by the media as people who are into the right-wing media are. If the media played up Yemen the way that they do Ukraine, they'd be all about Yemen. Like I don't think they wouldn't, because they're people of color. They just do
Right. It
whatever
just doesn't get fed to them. Yeah.
it doesn't get fed to them. They just do whatever the media tells them to do. They care about whatever the media tells them to care about, and they still believe in these institutions. So they live with the assumption that that disproportionate coverage is correct for reasons that they don't dig into. They just assume that there's good reason for it. And really, it's just because we need Saudi Arabia. We need their oil. We do not have an antagonistic foreign policy towards Saudi Arabia. We've armed them to commit these atrocities against Yemen, which kind of gets a little uncomfortable if you want to start covering what's happening to the people there. Whereas we have this hard on for antagonizing Russia, even though it's also a country that exports oil, more to Europe than to us. But we wanted to do Rocky IV all over again for whatever fucking reason. The people in power were just dying to see that movie again. And so the media, they go along with whatever they're told to go along with. They're not reporters. They're not reporting news. They do what the people in power tell them to do. They focus on what they're told to focus on. The only place you're going to see any counter narratives is fucking Tucker Carlson. It's like it. I can't even say Fox. It's like Tucker. It's like the one. There's like, he is the only person with a serious platform who's asking any questions about this.
Yeah, it's funny because the clip that we're going to play of Biden in just a couple of minutes was actually featured on a Laura Ingraham segment, because Greenwald went on Laura's show to talk about Ukraine. And, she sort of talked about how, now we're hearing things like we have to stay the course in Ukraine and, give them what they need to fight. And she started playing clips of Colin Powell and George Bush talking about, how we're going to stick it out in Iraq, even though it's not going well. And, look, in Tucker's case, like, I don't know if it's that Tucker actually had a genuine change of heart on those issues, or if he just got famous enough to think he could stake out a position as the guy who sort of came around and is now more anti-war. I'm not really sure. I'm not in his head. I couldn't tell you what his motivation is. But he seems to believe what he's saying right now. Whereas Ingraham, like when Ingraham starts playing clips about George Bush and Colin Powell and all that shit, it's like, I'm sorry, you're just, you are the hack of hacks. You were completely in the tank for George Bush the entire time. Like, I'm not convinced that you'd be singing this tune right now at all if it wasn't a Democrat in office, right? So, it's hard to tell where some of these people are coming from, but nonetheless, you're right. That's the only place where you even see this stuff talked about in this way. And that brings us into this second segment here, where Joe Biden actually signaled defeat for Ukraine in the Russia-Ukraine war. So he was talking about the May jobs report. He had a little conference, and he got a question about Ukraine and said that they would likely have to come to a, quote, negotiated settlement. And so we're going to play that clip here. I just got to cue it up here. Sorry for our live viewers. This will just take a second. I think it starts, 1822. So I'll back it up a second. There we go.
Mr. President, does Ukraine have to cede territory to achieve some peace?
And you've been always fair with me. From the beginning, I've said, and not everyone's agreed with me, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. It's their territory. I'm not going to tell them what they should and shouldn't do. But it appears to me that at some point along the line, there's a settlement here. And what that entails, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows at the time. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to put the Ukrainians in a position where they can defend themselves. Thank you.
Okay, so that little glitch where the sound cut out is where he said there's going to be a negotiated settlement. And the sound just didn't cut out on that video or our stream. It turns out that was just like the source audio cutting out at the point where he said negotiated settlement. All right. But, okay. Once again, I said this, I forget when that we did. It was right at the beginning of the war.
Yeah, right at the beginning. Yeah.
I quoted Jeremy Corbyn. Sorry, mine went blank for a second there. He said, look, all wars end politically. All wars end with politics and diplomacy. So why don't we just skip the killing part and go straight to the talking part? Because, and that one of the reasons why I quoted that is because I said at the beginning, as someone who I will fully confess, I had not known much about this topic until this war broke out. But I just said intuitively, I know it because it's been the history of every war we've fought basically for the past 50 years, that it always ends the way we think it's going to end at the very beginning. The war does not actually change the solution at all, which means they're all just a giant waste of life and resources. Of course, it's not a waste of resources for the actual beneficiaries of the war, like Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. They make a fortune. But isn't, I mean, how can people, they talk about how, Democrats, well, Democrats think half the country's dumb. Well, I think all the country's dumb. I think the entire country is dumb. How could you be, even if you are the most jingoistic, just flag-waving American slob who support our troops and with the freedom fries in Iraq and, those French, they'd all be speaking German if it wasn't for us, blah, 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 blah. Even if you buy all of this, even if you just drink the red, white, and blue Kool-Aid all day, every day, how do you not understand that we've lost all of these wars? I mean, if you're so proud of this country the way it is, if you love this country so much, then don't you ever stop and think, hey, we've lost all of these wars that we fought for the past 50 years. We never achieve what we want. Vietnam, we lost everything really since Vietnam. We've lost. And yet you still love the country. So if you still love the country...
Persian Gulf War.
Well, yeah, but even then, right, had to go back.
Had to go back. We had to do a sequel. Well, I mean, that's just good box office.
Right, yeah. Didn't finish the job.
The first one was a hit.
But like,
to do it bigger and better next time.
Like, you can't actually argue, like, no one can actually argue that these wars have made our country better off because we've pretty much lost all of them. And so if they haven't made the country better off, then don't you think all of the blood and treasure spent on these wars, had we not done that, the country would be much better off for not having been involved in these wars? How do you keep falling for the same thing over and over and over again? And this time you really got duped, because this time Joe Biden, who, as we saw in that press conference, can barely get through a sentence. I mean, he's almost falling asleep whenever he talks. He convinced you that Ukraine had a chance to win a ground war against Russia? You actually bought that line of shit? I mean, I'm sorry, it's just shockingly dumb. And what he said there is that, yes, it's going to end in a negotiated settlement. Well, guess what? That negotiated settlement could have happened back in February, and all of this could have been avoided. All of this could have been avoided. And it should have been avoided. And we were right about that, too. So like I said, this is sort of a victory lap show this evening that we have to take here.
Well,
we have to take it because...
It keeps reminding me of a classic Seinfeld episode where they actually played Risk. And anybody who has played Risk, a lot of it was pretty funny because it was written like you have to know that game to get some of these jokes. And he kept saying, I've got a lot of men on the Ukraine.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
That's what this reminds me of. We got a lot of men on the Ukraine. We're gonna come back and win the game with Ukraine. We've got all of our forces concentrated in Ukraine. Yeah, of course. In the end, if you know Russia's history of warfare, those are not people who are afraid to fight a prolonged battle of attrition that cost them horrific losses in material and men to win. That's pretty much how they've done war throughout their history. That's how they won World War II, just with massive, overwhelming numbers. Just throwing so many people into the meat grinder that eventually the battle tipped in their favor. Plus winter, they always rely on the winter, although that won't work with the Ukrainians. They're the same peoples basically in regards to that.
Right. This is just a matter of size. They're just bigger.
That's what I'm saying.
Like I said, just look at a map.
Because just the size of them, they'll win a war of attrition, and as a people, they are uniquely disposed to fight a war of attrition to the end. So they're not going to quit. They're not going to hit a point where they say, "No, it's too much now. We've lost too much now."
Yeah, and they're not being boxed out of the global economy really any more than the average middle-class American is being boxed out of the global economy, right? I mean, like, they're not suffering the way we... And look, this is why Vladimir Putin did this at this time, because he knew that we couldn't afford to fight back, and we cannot afford to fight back. We can't afford to fight back. Germany started buying gas in rubles now. I mean, they're just, they have to. They have to. Russia gets 40% of its gas. Europe gets 40% of its gas from Russia. We get 10% of our gas from Russia, and look at the havoc it's causing here. These European countries simply cannot afford to do this. And he knew that, and for all the bullshit op-eds about Putin's biggest mistake, Putin didn't see this coming. Click here to find out what Putin didn't see coming, right? It's all just nonsense. It's nonsense. Russia is winning. Of course they're winning. Look at a map. Look at the size of the country versus the size of the country they're fighting. That's why they're winning. It's the simplest thing in the world.
Right. Because in the end, they can afford setbacks.
Of course.
Ukraine can't. They just they just don't have enough people.
Right. The thing about Biden.
They had a general. I forget which show he was on, who basically laid it out, and he was saying,
I know who you're talking about. I forget his name, but Mick something, right?
I think it was a Marine, and he was like, for them, I'm not sure about that though. But he was like, okay, for Ukraine to actually win this war, in addition to the forces they have in the field right now, they'd have to be able to mount a force of 100,000 to actually start to attack and push Russia back to its borders. He was just basically saying it's not militarily possible for Ukraine to win this war with the numbers that they have. It just can't be done.
No, of course it can't be done. Again, completely obvious from day one, right? And
unless there are a lot of what was it? The Women's March had like 1 million people, right? So if they want to go,
well, that's the thing. If all the liberals who think this fight is so important would go and put their money where their big fucking mouths are, then maybe they'd have enough people. Because
where's the hashtag resistance to help out the Ukrainians? Where are they?
Because once again, we've said this many times here. Ukraine is waiving visa requirements for anyone who wants to go and fight.
Yeah, and I heard they're getting paid like double or triple what the Ukrainians are getting paid.
Really?
No, I heard they're getting paid like $1,500 a day or something to go over there and fight.
Wow, come to think of it, maybe I'll think about going. I have to check my calendar.
Look at me working my ass off.
Okay, yeah, right. Where's my calendar? I gotta see what I got going on next
30
week.
Days
maybe we'll have to cancel
30
next
days
week's
of
show.
Fighting, I can get a little Creole cottage.
We'll have to take a month off from doing the show. We'll go fight for Ukraine, and then we'll come back and we'll have a real set and everything, and we'll finance the whole operation.
Yeah, we're gonna make the bridge of the Millennium Falcon.
But yeah, that is one way for sure that they can increase their numbers. But the thing that Biden said there in that conference, which is like, look, it's up to Ukraine. We're not going to tell them what to do. And there was a great op-ed in the New York Times, of all places, that I'm going to read a little bit of in a few minutes. But it's just so sleazy and dishonest, to put it that way, when we are funneling all these weapons. That's like, if you know your roommate is really struggling to get sober and you're sitting out on the couch every night just pounding double whiskeys all night long and having a great time, yeah, you're technically, leaving what's his business, but like, you're encouraging him to go back on the wagon there, right? And just like this, like we're funneling all these weapons and say, hey, look, it's up to you. As long as you want to fight, we're going to help you. That's what Biden says there. He's like, listen, Ukraine can choose to do what they want. It's their country, but we're going to support them for as long as they choose to fight. And I'm sorry, that's not the morally responsible choice. The morally responsible choice is to sit this fucking guy down and say, hey, this has to stop. This has to stop, because not only are your people getting slaughtered, but this is causing too much chaos around the world to the point where this is going to start killing people. I'm sorry. Like, it's a serious thing. $6 gas is going to start killing people here. People who are living close to the edge cannot afford this shit.
Right.
People are going to die over this shit.
I'm surprised the wheels haven't come off already, frankly, because we already had numbers that most people couldn't afford a $500 emergency before.
Right. You're going to see
so how the
utility
fuck
bills
are they going to survive
skyrocket.
now?
Evictions
Dude,
start back up.
I can see when I go to the bodega and get a sandwich and a drink, and it's $10.
You know how much I paid for an oil change the other day? Because I realized that I misread the sticker on the top of the windshield, and I realized, oh shit, I'm overdue for an oil change. And when you drive for a living, you have to, stay up to date on that shit. You can't risk it, because then you you dig yourself in a hole of, car problems.
Right. Then
oil change
for the company store.
Exactly. Right. I get the full synthetic blend so that I don't have to do oil changes, because it's worth it. You get like double the triple of the mileage out of it. You know how much this fucking oil change was? $87 for an oil change. I mean, this is just not sustainable. It's just not sustainable. And to act like, well, it's up to them. We have your back for as long as you want to keep this on. I'm sorry. The world does not revolve around Ukraine, number one. And number two, even if it did, like I said, 60 to 100 Ukrainian soldiers are being killed every day. That's more than we lost per day in Vietnam. This is a slaughter. And the only sane thing to do now is to make it stop. And the only way to make it stop is to do what you should have done in February, which is agree to the terms that Russia has laid out. And right now, you may have to pay a little bit of a premium on that. You might not get as good a deal now as you would have earlier. So if anything, all this will be for not just nothing. You will have made everything worse. Plus all of the bloodshed.
Well, the arms manufacturers need this war because the whole war on terror is winding down.
Well, that's what I mean.
You can't really.
Cui bono, right? They're the only ones who benefit.
Where do they go from here?
Exactly.
Like, what boogeyman could you? We almost need an invasion from space after this. Like, who are you going to play up as the boogeyman if this gets negotiated to a peace? I mean, I guess you got China there, but yeah, the Chinese are pretty cagey about getting into any kind of actual physical confrontation. You'll be hard pressed to get the Chinese to start a shooting war with you until they're in a position to release their winged bat soldiers from their secret labs that I'm convinced they're working on.
Well, and also the thing about that, I mean, we got into this on a previous show also. This country could not function if there's a war with China. Like, I don't even understand how we would have a civilization if we ever got that hostile.
You better maintain that flat screen. It might be the last one you're able to buy for quite some time.
Yeah, exactly. Keep that iPhone charged and out of the water. No water. I know they say the bag of rice trick. Trust me, you don't want to let it happen too often. All right. Yeah. The New York Times, surprisingly, put out what I thought was a pretty good op-ed by a guy named Christopher Caldwell, who, Russell, you've referenced before as having written something pretty good. We're not going to read the whole thing, but I am just going to read a little bit of it because this does have to do with the Russia-Ukraine war, which is a major topic of the evening. The war in Ukraine may be impossible to stop, and the U.S. deserves much of the blame. A guest essay in the New York Times by Christopher Caldwell. I'm not going to read all of the exposition here. The United States has helped turn this tragic, local, and ambiguous conflict into a potential world conflagration. By misunderstanding the world's logic, Mr. Guaineau argues, the West, led by the Biden administration, is giving the conflict a momentum that may be impossible to stop. In 2014, the United States backed an uprising in its final stages of violent uprising against the legitimately elected Ukrainian government of Viktor Yanukovych, which was pro-Russian. The corruption of Mr. Yanukovych's government has been much adduced by the rebellion's defenders, but corruption is a perennial Ukrainian problem even today. Russia, in turn, annexed Crimea, a historically Russian-speaking part of Ukraine that since the 18th century had been home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet. One can argue about Russians' claims to Crimea, but Russians take them seriously. Hundreds of thousands of Russian and Soviet fighters died defending the Crimean city of Sevastopol from European forces during 2 sieges, one during the Crimean War and one during World War II. In recent years, Russian control of Crimea has seemed to provide a stable regional arrangement. Russia's European neighbors at least have let sleeping dogs lie. Now, here's where it gets pretty interesting, and I think this is burying the lead in a sense, but the United States never accepted the arrangement. On November 10th, 2021, the United States and Ukraine signed a charter on strategic partnership that called for Ukraine to join NATO, condemned ongoing Russian aggression, and affirmed an unwavering commitment to the reintegration of Crimea into Ukraine. Now, I had not heard that. Had you heard that? That on November 10th of last year, the U.S. and Ukraine signed a charter on strategic partnership that called for Ukraine to join NATO and called for the reacquisition of Crimea? Because that seems like a very relevant detail that every American should know.
And that's batshit insane.
Yeah, but if that's true, then I'm sorry, we risk getting this video demonetized by saying this because YouTube doesn't like it when you take the wrong side on this. If that's true, that means that Russia was justified in thinking that Ukraine was a threat to them. Now, that doesn't justify killing civilians. Of course, you never justify that. A war crime is a war crime. If we're anti-war, we have to be anti-war on both sides, right? That's where I'll try to get our monetization back by saying that. But I'm saying, this is a major detail. And it's such an indictment of the media that, this is not known. It's not known that in November, we got together with Ukraine and say, hey, yeah, you guys should join NATO and take the region back that they annexed earlier. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable that no one ever brings that up. No one ever brings that up.
Well,
just shocking.
What's really shocking is that they brought it up in the New York Times. Somebody's getting fired for printing this.
That's what I mean. It's just you never see a thing like this in the New York Times. And he also goes on to make a point. I can't find it here right now, but he makes basically the same point that I made earlier, which is it's just cowardly and absurd to act as if we are not involved in the war because we are not committing ground troops when we are funding the Ukrainian war effort. Supplying billions of dollars in weapons to one side means are materially involved and invested in the war. It's just ridiculous to say, well, no, this is all Ukraine and we're just going to back them up doing what they want to do.
Yeah, we're at war with Russia. We're just making other people fight it.
Right. That's what they call a proxy war. Right. That's why everybody has called this a proxy war. And Noam Chomsky said, yeah, we're going to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, not to the last American soldier, unless, as Russell said, all of the pussy hat people want to put their money where their mouths are and go and join the fight.
You already have helmets of a sort.
Yeah, right.
Right? I mean, as soon as the Russians see those pussy hats, I'm telling you, they're going to run.
Those
pussies are powerful. Right?
Yeah.
They're going to flee back, right back to Moscow.
At the very least, they're flexible enough that you could pull them over a real helmet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, it'd be a little bit difficult to camouflage in those unless you hid inside a vat of Pepto-Bismol, I suppose. Then you can camouflage yourself. But other than that, you'd kind of stick out with a bright pink hat.
Well, it would be like the Monty Python bit about the competition between the powers in World War II to find a joke that would be so funny. It would instantly kill the other side.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So this is, you might kill the Russians with laughter if you guys show up and storm the battlefield.
Yeah, right, exactly. We got a pretty good crowd filed in here. I made this announcement at the beginning of the show here, but I'll make it once again. If you see a little bell icon next to the subscribe icon, hit that bell icon, because when you hit the bell icon, that makes it so that you are notified whenever we go live or whenever we drop a video. If you're subscribed, that just prioritizes our videos in your general feed when you go on YouTube. But if you hit the bell icon, you'll actually see it come across your phone. Do this as, we're live, join, click the button, and then you're here. So that would be very helpful.
If you hit it 3 times, Candyman will attack you through your bathroom mirror.
Right, so just hit it once. Once will do. And don't double click.
Unless you're into that kind of thing.
Yeah, right, exactly. But yeah, so make sure you are subscribed in that way. Patrons and paid Substack subscribers have call-in access to these shows, and I finally put our podcast feed up on the Substack feed. So if you are subscribed to our Substack, you'll get the full-length podcast episodes right through Substack as well. If you're subscribed on any other player, stay right where you are. You don't have to change anything. But if you join our Substack, even for free, you will get those episodes sent right to you, the audio versions. And the audio version of this podcast will probably be up tomorrow morning. All right, we got one last segment to cover this evening. We're running a very streamlined show. This is a very professionally done show. We're right on schedule. 7:45. We're 3/4 of the way through. It doesn't get any tighter than that, right?
Good thing we took that Tony Robbins workshop.
Yeah, exactly. Paid off.
How do you build your successful podcast?
Right.
For success.
Right. Stay on schedule and remind and make sure you plug the bell. Make sure you plug the bell. Got to plug that bell. I can't believe I didn't know about the bell. Here I am, a schmuck.
He gave us the first 2 rules for free. The third one we got to pay for.
Right. We got to pony up some money. Had you ever heard of the bell? I never knew about the bell. I mean, I heard there was a bell, but I didn't know what it did.
I thought it gave angels their wings.
Yeah, see, I could tell you didn't know about the bell either from the look on your face. All right, we got one more segment here. We're going to talk some midterms, all right? We did a Pennsylvania primary show the evening of the Pennsylvania primaries. That was, I believe, May 17th. And just this week, that race was finally called for Dr. Oz. So Dr. Oz, by less than 1,000 votes out of however many million votes cast, actually prevailed. And he is now the Republican nominee for Senate. He goes up against John Fetterman in the state of Pennsylvania.
Hang on. So do we cancel Oprah now? Because I thought the rule was anyone you've ever been associated with, you get canceled because of them.
Oh yeah, that's right, because of her and Dr. Oz.
Yeah, I thought that's the rule now. Anybody you ever knew, shook hands with, breathed on, supported, don't you get canceled? I thought you get canceled for that.
Well, I mean, these guys all knew Donald Trump pretty well before he ran, so there'd be a lot of open spots available if that were the case.
That's true. Well, it all depends on whether you're in you're in good standing with the cancelers.
Right, exactly. So the reason I found this to be a sort of interesting topic, so you have Dr. Oz going up against John Fetterman. Fetterman obviously had a stroke. He's got some health issues, but he's a fairly strong candidate for PA. Won his primary overwhelmingly. Oz, the Trump base was never really sold on Oz. I'm not really sold on Oz. I don't think he's a very talented politician. I watched him in the debates. No, he's got some, right, exactly. So he has a certain skill set. But to me, that race seems very winnable for Democrats, even in a red wave year. In fact, all of the 3 Senate races that we're going to talk about here seem very winnable for Democrats, even in a red wave year. So you have Oz, Fetterman in PA. In Georgia, well, actually, let me save Georgia for the end because I have some video for that. That's actually pretty good. You have in Ohio, J.D. Vance going up against Tim Ryan. Now, what's interesting about this race is that Mike DeWine, the Republican governor of Ohio, is up by 15 points in the polls. Whereas the polling between Vance and Ryan is actually very, very tight. There was one poll that had Ryan actually up by 2 points, and one poll that had Vance up by 3 points. And so if Vance is polling a dozen to 15 points behind the Republican governor, that's a sign that he's got real weaknesses. And this is a sign, and this is, Russell, one of the things that you said, that yes, Trump has a stranglehold over the party in that the diehard Republicans are now Trump Republicans, right? But in terms of big picture, they may be better off with these like milquetoast sort of like Glenn Youngkin type candidates this year, because the Democrats are so unpopular now that the GOP may have been better off just playing it as close to the center as they possibly can. Just don't freak too many people out. And, you know, Vance with the very, you know, nativist nationalist, the biggest problem in our state is Mexican fentanyl. You know, it's just like, he's just so dark. It's just so relentlessly dark and violent. And by violent, I don't mean physically violent, but he paints a picture like we're just going to go to war with the people who don't like us, right? It's just totally vicious political vision. That's going to scare some people off. And I think that's one of the reasons why, like, you know, the mainstream boring country club douchebag governor is cruising to a reelection victory. And you have Vance now in a close race with Tim Ryan. Now, look, it's early. If this inflation keeps going the way it is, I think it's going to be very difficult for a Democrat to win in any kind of state like this. But for now, I think that is a race to watch because, you know, I mean, if Tim Ryan, who is an extraordinarily boring Democrat, if he can prevail over J.D. Vance, that really says a lot about the Trump stock, I think.
Yeah, well, Vance is literally coming out of a nascent fascist movement. And this is basically what fascists do, right? I mean, yeah. Trump's American Carnage speech was a classic fascist speech.
Right.
The world is falling apart, so you need us. You need strong men, and I would say even these fascists will concede this much to the 21st century, and women, to step forward and restore the country and its values. And you know, they're fascists, so of course, I mean, they go for apocalyptic scenarios. That's the only way they can justify putting themselves into power. That's the way they try to scare people to putting them into power. Vance, I haven't seen him do his thing, so I can't comment on his talent. Usually once I see somebody, I have a pretty good sense of who's going to win, and I haven't seen him campaign. Yeah.
All right. That is fair enough. But I do think it means something that he is polling that far behind.
That far behind, sure. Although remember, I mean, Ryan has held that seat for a while, right? Or
Ryan is a congressman. Now he's running for Senate.
He's moving into the Senate, but I mean, he's held that.
Oh, he's a known quantity in Ohio.
Really.
Yeah, and
time,
look,
right?
he's a boring. And look, like my opinion of this has changed.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Ryan is not. No one's going to mistake him for woke. So
yes,
and
this is something that has sort of changed in the past year, and I know some people are going to get mad at me for saying this because we used to think that progressives were more electable against Republicans than the centrists were. I don't necessarily think that's true anymore because I think that a lot of the Bernie left has been, you know, co-opted by the woke left. And I think the whole brand is just toxic now, number one. Number two, I think a lot of the people who would be inclined to support the sort of Bernie left candidates or even like the squad candidates, those are people like us who are just not invested in this process at all anymore. Like, we're not even voting anymore. So, like, who's left to support a left candidate? I'm sorry, the electorate has become more centrist on the Democratic side because the lefties have all checked out. Right? That's what I mean by that.
Write in tickets made up of fictional characters.
Well, right. Okay. But you understand what I'm saying, right? The lefties have all basically checked out. And so what this
If I
means is
want to,
that
if I want
now,
to vote for House Atreides, that's my
right,
business.
right. No, but like they won, right? They won in terms of like the Democratic Party. Yeah, the centrists have won. It's now their party because I'm not even going to try and take it from them anymore. Fuck you. You can have it. I think that's certainly where I'm at. I think, Russell, that's where you're at. I think that's where a lot of people who think like us are at. So what that means is that you have to face facts and say that, yeah, the Democratic Party right now is a party that in a general election is going to be more favorable to centrist candidates like Tim Ryan than it would be to, say, Morgan Harper, who was the lefty candidate who he beat by a mile in that Senate primary. Sorry. Excuse me. But that is just the way it is right now. It's not a progressives party now because I think the base of support for progressive candidates has just become too disaffected by the whole thing.
It's an interesting.
And so I think Ryan is a good candidate in that way, in the sense that he's the best candidate to beat a guy like J.D. Vance. Yeah. And a year ago, I would not have said that, or 2 years ago now. Jesus, time flies when you're locked inside the house for 2 fucking years. But yeah, 2 years ago, I would not have said that. 2 years ago, I would have said you need to ride the energy of the Bernie movement and the squad movement and stuff like that, and that's going to be your horse if you're going to win. That's not the case anymore. That coalition is too fractured, and the woke branding has just been too toxic, and I think it's over. It's over. Inside the Democratic Party, I think it's over. And so let Tim Ryan have the party. Good luck. See what happens. I won't be donating. but in terms of like your best shot to beat a guy like J.D. Vance, yeah, probably a boring fuck like Tim
Ryan. Yeah, I mean, I think it partly depends on where you are. Obviously, that's a relatively conservative area. But you're right. They can't field candidates who are progressive without progressives, and progressives have kind of lost interest in the whole Democratic Party thing.
Right. Exactly.
The question is, can you field any candidates without progressives? Because as we saw with the whole Biden Republican thing, no Republicans are voting for Democrats. So if we're not voting for Democrats, who is voting for Democrats? Like in the end, who's voting for them? Are there really enough people to push them over the top? Because you're not persuading the other side. They're not coming over.
Right. And, it's interesting that you made that point, because one of the things I should mention, I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but in both polls, Ryan v. Vance, each candidate was like low 40s, high 30s. So you have a large chunk in each of those polls who have not made up their mind yet. And, I think that final 20% is going to swing according to the way things are in 6 months from now. If gas is up at fucking $8 a gallon in Cincinnati, it's going to be Vance, because those undecideds are just going to break that way. If things get a little more under control, which I don't understand how they're going to, even Joe Biden says he doesn't really know how they're going to, then maybe Ryan has a shot. But I do. It's good that you brought that up, because in each of those polls, both candidates are polling well under 50, which leaves a lot of room for events to swing it either way.
Right. Well, who are the undecideds? Independents? Who are they?
I didn't look at the detailed breakdown of the poll, but I would imagine, look, Ryan's support is coming from the diehard Democrats, and Vance's support is coming from the diehard Republicans. And look, I think it makes perfect sense that an independent, like an actual moderate voter in this case, would sort of be waiting and seeing, because they're not too threatened by Tim Ryan, and they feel a little threatened by J.D. Vance because he's such a fucking maniac. But hey, look, gas prices get out of control, they're going to vote against the incumbent party, period. Right? And so I think that's why you're seeing those numbers pan out like that.
Well, I think anybody who's thinking about politics needs to go read that article about the new right, because you can't understand Vance without understanding that. Like, these people are really engaged in a project to overthrow the government and replace it with something else. And
Right.
and their something else is a very right-wing vision of what that would be. As I mentioned a few times to my shock, monarchy is on the table for these people. Like, this is what they're talking about. So when you see someone like J.D. Vance running, it seems like he's probably too smart to believe a lot of what he's saying. But just like the Nazis, and it's not a comparison I'm making, pound for pound. But look, a lot of those guys understood that they were sprouting bullshit. That was part of the rap. They were very aware of that. So it seems that way a little bit to me with him in particular.
Well, the thing about that is, as you've said, I think the right, even
like
this new
fascism
right,
is a very cynical kind of a political project. It assumes that the people can't govern themselves. It's a very bread and circuses mentality about governance.
yes, indeed. But you also have to remember the point that you made a few shows back, whereas like the right wing is actually talking about real problems now, where the left isn't. And as much as, Vance's rhetoric about Mexican fentanyl destroying Ohio, yes, I mean, I think that's, I don't live in Ohio. I'm not really in a position to say for sure how wrong he is about that, but I suspect he's pretty wrong about that. But it's speaking to a real problem that everyday people are facing.
Well, yeah.
And
fentanyl.
as much as like
what makes it Mexican?
Well, right, exactly. The Mexican fentanyl is where it just goes to a place that I think a lot of people are hesitant to go, which is why I think you have him in the low 40s, right, in terms of polling, because I think there are a lot of people who are just hesitant to pull the trigger and go down that road unless they absolutely have to. I think in this cycle, the GOP would be much better off with fucking red button vest Glenn Youngkin guy, right? Just boring Romney country club, just not a Democrat. That's all you have to be. All you have to be is not a Democrat, and you are fairly safe in this cycle.
Anti-woke.
Right,
that seems to be working very well for them.
Right, but you don't have to be this aggressively fascistic in this cycle is, I guess, what I'm saying. And I think the only reason you would be is if you really do believe it. Like, that's the thing. I kind of think Vance, maybe he's
fentanyl, really.
Maybe he's playing the hits a little bit in that way. But I think there's a real vision there.
To me is the fact that he was anti-Trump at the beginning. Well,
yeah, sure.
that tells me that he's being an opportunist.
Yeah, you might be right. I didn't actually think of that point. That is a good point. And that ties into this final race that we're going to preview.
Said he might vote for Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, right. And that actually connects to the final race, because this is going to be a real test of just how far off the deep end this country is willing to go. The Herschel Walker versus Raphael Warnock race. So Walker just won the nomination, right? He just won the nomination, and Walker is actually up in the polls.
He's going to sack inflation.
Right, exactly. He's actually winning in the polls because Georgia went blue by 12,000 votes this cycle, but Georgia has been a red state for, up until the Biden barely edged this one out. And so Walker is actually up in the polls. He just wins the nomination, right? Trump backed him and everything. And he responds to that, I guess, first interview out of the gate, or one of the first interviews out of the gate, with Killer Mike, actually. Walker just seemed to just drown whatever goodwill he developed with Donald Trump by basically calling him a liar. So let me just play this clip, and then we'll just talk a little bit about this race some more.
One thing that people don't know is President Trump never asked me, and I need to tell him that he never asked. I heard it all on television that he's going to ask Herschel. He's saying Herschel to run. President Trump never came out as Herschel will you run for that Senate
Really?
seat? Did Herschel run for this? He never asked. So I'm mad at him because he never asked, but he's taking credit that he asked. Before all this started coming about, my wife and I went with Pastor.
Let me just pause this because this really should have been set up. So Trump apparently said that he convinced Herschel Walker to run for Senate.
Right.
He convinced him to run. And now Herschel's saying, no, Trump didn't ask me to run. He said he asked me to run because now he's taking credit for me. But no, he lied, basically. He never asked me to run. And so guess who did ask Herschel Walker to run? Take a guess, Russell. 5 seconds.
Hillary Clinton.
No, come on. Who would ask this guy to run?
Who would ask Herschel Walker to run?
All right, time is up. You'll find out in just a second.
Tony Evans at Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship. And we went into prayer. And I prayed about it. And to be honest with you, I was praying that God would bring somebody else. I'm like, I'm happy. My life is doing well. I got a company, man. I'm rolling. But I love the Lord Jesus.
Yeah.
The Lord Jesus asked him to run, of course.
Oh, okay.
You didn't see that one coming?
Yeah.
The Lord Jesus Christ asked Herschel Walker to run. And
I-
then
you know,
Herschel
I'm
Walker says,
surprised-
I wish he'd found somebody else. I wish Jesus found somebody else because I have a good life. I don't need this shit. Right? But no, Jesus found Herschel Walker and needed Herschel Walker to run. Okay, this guy, see, I actually believe Vance wants to be the Ohio senator. I'm starting to think Walker, maybe like Donald Trump in 2015, didn't actually have any intention of becoming president. He figured he'd run, to make some headlines, maybe up his stock at NBC, right? But he didn't actually expect to win. I mean, this guy is just so profoundly unserious that you almost think he doesn't want it. I mean, he just said basically he didn't want it. I have a good life. I didn't want Jesus to convince me to run for Senate. Now I got to run for Senate. And your first move out of the gate after you win the nomination is to call Donald Trump, the kingmaker of the party, a liar on TV and say, no, he's trying to take credit for my success. So this is another race that is extremely winnable for the Democrats. So it's weird because you have this red wave year where the House is absolutely going to go full GOP. There's no saving that because these are districts that have been gerrymandered, right? And just, each of these congressional, the thing about the House is a House race in rural or suburban Georgia can't be bailed out by high Democratic turnout in Atlanta, right? Because the district does not contain Atlanta. Statewide races are really enthused Democratic base or just a sort of, shy, nervous, moderate vote can swing a race to a Democrat. And in each of these three states here, despite Republicans poised to clean up in the House, you do have a situation where the Democrats may have a chance. And again, huge asterisk here because the country could be in hell by November. In which case, no, all bets are off. But you do have three key races here where the Republicans have nominated just some real fucking whack jobs. And the Democrats have played it pretty close to the center. And I think these are three very winnable races in a red wave year for the blue team, oddly enough. See, when have I ever said that before? When have I ever, projected any optimism for the Democratic Party on this show? Never. That's one way in which this episode is not a rehashing of old.
It is, sure. It is possible because of the dynamics of those particular races. Tim Ryan is liked in that state, and because he is a Democrat who's well established, his brand is not being in line with wokeness.
He actually opposed Nancy Pelosi for speakership.
Right. So
threatened to run against her. I don't know if he ever did, or if he did, he didn't get very far. But
he's uniquely invulnerable to a lot of the toxicity of the Democratic brand. Herschel Walker's a screwball, man. He talked about how he had a powder for COVID or something.
Yeah, he had a COVID
powder that you spray in the doorway and you walk through and the COVID won't affect you. Yeah, he's
Imagine
a nut.
Everybody following that advice, just everybody in a supermarket walking around spraying in front of them.
Yeah, so he's a total kook to the point that it's hard to imagine him getting through this whole race without saying things that are so batshit insane that people just can't vote for him.
And also, like, I mean, we talked a little bit about this with Kate on our last show, who, by the way, check that episode out. We interviewed my friend, Kate Sayer, who's also the finance director for Andrew Yang's Forward Party. But we talked about how the primary process sort of produces candidates that majorities of people don't want to vote for. Perfect example of that could be the nomination of a guy like Herschel Walker. Like, I don't know how many votes he won that race with, but it's a tiny sliver of votes because you're talking about the Republican primary. So that right away shuts out everybody who's not in the party. And then among those people, you have half of them vote for Walker, 60% vote for Walker. So you're talking about when you do the math, a very tiny percentage of the overall population is in charge of nominating these candidates. And so once all of Georgia gets a good look at Herschel Walker, there's going to be a lot of hesitation there, I guarantee you. Because like you said, the guy is just, a whack job, the kind we're really not used to see. I mean, he's like Sarah Palin level.
Right. And Fetterman is actually a gifted politician as opposed to Dr. Oz. So, yeah, I mean, those are three races. You're right. But if we have $10 gas.
Right. That trumps everything. Right. It just trumps everything.
I don't know if any Democrat could win.
Exactly. And so that's always the X
country
factor.
is in, I guess, probably the worst state I've ever seen it in. I think anyone alive has really seen it because nobody's really alive from the Depression anymore. So,
yeah, I mean, the only thing I suspect had similar vibes was like the energy crisis in the late 70s. And look what that did to Jimmy Carter, right? I mean, that's the only pair, and I was not alive for that time, so I couldn't really tell you how that felt.
Yeah, I don't make that comparison because I mean, look, in terms of social decay and collapse,
well, yes,
we're a long way from that. But at the same time, we weren't coming out of a pandemic either.
Right.
So you didn't have that thrown into the mix. So it's hard to say. It's by the time you hit that, like the 70s, you were talking about like 20 years of social decay. So this is, at that point, you were at the escape from New York point. And not just New York, I mean, cities around the country between white flight and the gas crisis and stagflation. It was just chaos, just utter chaos.
But in a sense, you have a lot of those similar dynamics working. It's just in a more.
We haven't gotten there yet, though.
No, but it's also
because they spent the last like 20, 30 years in cities shoring up the police department and militarizing them.
Well, that's the thing. Well, I mean, this is sort of what I was getting at. It's like a lot of those dynamics are here now, but this is just a more technological age, I feel like. So we don't really see that as much because it's just not as analog a world. So I get that's a bit of an abstract way to make this point. Let me see if I could put this a little bit better. I've been thinking a lot this week about the breakaway society conspiracy theory, right? They say, well, this is like a conspiracy theory that guys like Alex Jones and people like that have sort of peddled, that the sort of elites are forming a breakaway society. Basically, they they see the writing on the wall. They see that things are going to go to hell, and they are going to wall themselves off in a sort of insulated utopia where they can keep living the good life and everybody else can just suffer.
Yeah, I mean, that's not great. They bought land in New Zealand and
yes, well, yeah, they've cited
like
that.
That's a fact. Like that's not made up. They really have.
Sure. But what the point I would make, as this ties into what I just said earlier, is that they may not be creating a physical breakaway society.
And to that, I will just quote Hunter Thompson: "Servants are the Achilles heel of the rich." In the end, how do they think they're going to manage? When money doesn't mean anything, what makes you think that those security people aren't going to jack everything that you built? Like, why are they going to listen to Mark Zuckerberg?
I mean, look,
All your domestics are going to kill you and take your shit.
What they're betting on is sort of what I am talking about, which is like they're not creating necessarily a physical place where they can go and like physically hide from everybody, but they are creating a sort of breakaway society within this society that we already have.
Well, that's
and they're a
thing,
part of
but
it.
They really are building these apocalypse bunkers.
No, I understand, and that's what fuels these kinds of theories.
Right.
Is that I mean, there's always a kernel of truth at every one of these crazy theories. That's where they come from, right? But I'm saying, even if there is no breakaway bunker place, right, or some like world, like in the Don't Look Up movie, right? It was some different planet that they were colonizing that they can move to when the comet hit Earth, right? Even if that's not a physical place, they are insulating themselves right in front of our eyes. Among us, right?
That's
There's
what
like
That's what I would argue. It's not a conspiracy. It's right out in the open.
Right. There's
all
a
the conspiracies are like right there in your face.
Exactly. There is a parallel world among us. When we go outside, right? When you walk down the street in New York City, you're walking alongside people in your world as sort of a working guy, and you're also walking right alongside people whose real world is completely different, and they are completely insulated from the problems that affect you. If people out here in the suburbs, we walk through a shopping mall, we are living amongst people who are not going to be affected by this. And the ruling powers in this country and the world have just become so indifferent to the conditions of those other people that we're talking about, people like us, right? That's what it feels like. It feels like their plan right now is to just ride out the end game as comfortably as they can and just fuck everybody else. How else do you explain this war in Ukraine? How else do you explain putting the country and the world through all of this economic turmoil for the sake of what? For what? So that Ukraine might theoretically join NATO someday? It's ridiculous. It's absurd. It's absurd. No ruling class with any concern for the well-being of ordinary people whatsoever would be doing this. They are creating a breakaway society. It's not a physical place. It's right here. It's right here. Your neighbor could be part of it. Your neighbor might not go broke when gas hits $10 a gallon, or when utility bills get to be $600 a month. Maybe you will. Maybe the person living right down the street from you will be just fine. They're in that other world. They're in that other place. And they're in another space. And that seems to be what's going on. That seems to be what's going on. And the people who are running this don't care. They don't care. And the question is, Russell, as you said, what happens when money's worthless, right? Then if there's no physical barrier between you and the have-nots, how does that work out? How does that work out? Have they bought off enough people to keep enough people invested in the system to keep everybody safe? Or will we just have a full-on social collapse, right?
Well, it's like, who's that Scottish economist? The Hamptons is not a defensible position.
Right, yeah. You brought that up before. I forget what his name was.
That's, at that point, that is where I think Thompson's observation is very relevant, because in the end, you need all these servants to run all that. And in those circumstances, why are they going to listen to Mark Zuckerberg? Once you take away the basic premises of our society, they're going to kill those motherfuckers. Like the people making their beds, the people cooking for them, they're going to turn around and kill them. If you are in a situation where the paycheck doesn't mean anything anymore.
Well, this is what I was talking about, how like now versus the 70s. Like in the 70s, you had like domestic bombings, as a matter of routine.
We had over 2,000 a year in the early 70s.
Yeah, over 2,000 a year. A year.
Yeah. On any given day, 1/3 of American college campuses were shut down by protests.
Yeah, and now the whole world is just much more stupefied than that. You know what I mean? We're just in a much more, I don't want to say soulless, because that almost endorses things that I would never want to endorse, but I would just say like the population is just too dazed to actually mobilize in any kind of way like that. And I think that's why you're not seeing and feeling it as viscerally as you did back in the 70s. But I think a lot of the dynamics are still there. They're still there. They're just not felt as profoundly now because I think through several different processes, globalization, technology, I think, the sort of human experience has just been sort of lobotomized, right? I mean,
No,
to the
no.
point where you don't see those sorts of dynamics manifesting themselves so outwardly and so physically. But that's not to say you can't get there. But I think that's the reason why we're on this sort of slow walk to our own demise. Like, look, I drive Instacart and Uber Eats and DoorDash and Grubhub. These services are kind of expensive. Like, you order a $15 meal from Applebee's on DoorDash, they hit you with a service fee plus some other bullshit fee plus the tip for the driver. So like a $15 meal, if you order it for yourself, as a lot of people do at lunchtime and stuff, probably costs you about $30. Like, you're paying $30 for a hamburger and fries, right? It's a lot of fucking money. It's a waste of money. And people's savings are now starting to go down, as we've learned, right? Credit card debt is up, but like, I'm still doing, like, the orders keep coming in. The orders keep coming in, and I'm not delivering these orders to rich people in rich neighborhoods. I'm delivering these to like working class apartment complexes, sometimes in the city of Newburgh, which is a very poor city. Poor people spending $25 on a stupid fucking McDonald's lunch between the delivery fees and the tips and everything else. And so, like, this is not computing. This is why I think we're in for a major economic crash, because this can't go on forever. It just doesn't make sense. Things do not add up here.
Well, Jamie Dimon made a lot of news this week
well, exactly,
saying that we're in.
I've never said he's right about anything, but I think he's right about that.
Oh no, Dimon is usually pretty astute about things like this.
I'm saying it because I think he's a piece of shit. That's why.
I just
don't want to give him credit. That's really why.
I mean, he's a piece of shit like Kissinger, and Kissinger is out there talking about how Ukraine is going to have to, make a settled peace.
Wind it down, right? Yeah.
Sometimes the devil, you got to go to the devil to find out about what the sixth ring of hell is like, right? Who knows better? So Dimon, his macroeconomic insights are usually pretty sharp. They're usually pretty on point. And he says there's a hurricane right down the road coming at us, and he's very skeptical that we can get through this without a recession. And I think a recession is a kind word. And, everyone, the point he made, I watched a clip that this guy had to basically jump through hoops to get the whole interview. The whole interview is not out there. It's only accessible to like financial journalists. So this YouTuber convinced them that he's legit enough that they let him see the entire interview.
Right.
And, what Dimon says is basically this has never been done in human history. You've never had this kind of quantitative easing in human history. And so as a result, we don't really know what happens when it ends. There is no historical precedent for what happens when the Treasury has put this much money into the markets and then pulls it out. It's never happened. Never happened. We don't know what the effects of that are going to be. What you're seeing more and more is an analysis taking hold that the last 15 years, basically since the 2008 financial crisis, has been an artificial market that has been artificially propped up by the Fed, low interest rates, QE, asset purchases.
Right.
We have not seen the markets function according to their true value and worth in 15 years. They have not been subject to market forces in 15 years. So the general consensus is, okay, this was kind of a golden age for investing in stocks and assets, and that's probably over now for a very long time, where you're going to see these crazy returns in the stock market. Like, this was a phase. And now you're going to go much more back to what historically investing was like. Boring, quiet, if you're lucky, 1-2% gains a year.
Well, I mean, look, I will have to say, of course, this is not financial advice, but just on a personal note, my father finally divested from the stock market. Older guy, has a good retirement, saved up some money, Social Security paying off, blah, 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 blah. And, I've been saying this to him for a couple years now, like, you only stand to lose a life-changing amount of money at this point. You don't stand to gain a life-changing amount of money at this point. So once the only dramatic change in your life can be negative, that's when it's time to get out, right? Right? I mean, I don't know anything about this shit, but it seems to me that's when it's time. Well, this week he finally did, because this is all, and what you said there is exactly right, and it's something that a lot of, quite frankly, sorry to all of the boomers in the audience, but a lot of the older generation doesn't get. They all say, well, it'll all come back. All right, if it goes down, it'll all come back. It always does, right? It's always ups and downs. But what you just articulated there is, no, we're actually venturing into uncharted territory this time, where we don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to come back. This is not like all the other times. And so,
I mean, they're right in a sense, but how long a time horizon are you looking at?
Well, that's the other thing. I
like
said not to be
if
morbid.
You're 20 years old, should you stop putting money into your 401k because of this? No,
right, because it'll rebound enough by the time you have to cash in. Right. I actually told him the exact thing. I said, listen, I don't want to get morbid with you, but, by the time things rebound, you might not be here to reap the benefits.
That's the thing. That's the thing. Like, you could be the closest analogy that people are looking at as, your negative case scenario is Japan. Japan's assets never went back to the value they had before their bubble burst in the 90s. They had a real estate bubble. They had a stock market bubble. It popped. The value never came back. To this day, if you had invested at the top of the market in the 90s in Japan, you never got back what you put in. Never. So some people are saying, yeah, this could be what we're looking at. We could be looking at like 20 years of very minimal growth, where if you did buy now, you're never seeing that. Or like if the top of the market was really November, the market peaked in November. At least the NASDAQ did. The S&P peaked in January. But yeah, basically, if you bought then, you may never see that again.
Right.
I mean, dude, you're looking at some of these valuations, or the drops, like Shopify, for example, which is not a bad company. Like, I don't think that's a bad long-term investment. But Shopify was trading at 1,800 in November. It's trading at about 350 now. Roku was up around 500. It's around 100 now. That's all of these names took these kinds of hits. And there's a decent chance that there's further for them to fall. You got stocks like Virgin Galactic that were trading at 55. They're trading at like $6-7 now. Like certain sectors of the market have crashed. Like, what do you call that? It's 70 to 80% down from its high. I mean, that's
right.
That's a pretty serious crash. Even Apple, I mean, it hasn't crashed out like that, but it's at the low end of its range. So, and the question everyone is asking now is this a bottom? Is this enough? Has enough froth been taken out of the market? And it seems like the smart people who, whatever his ethics might be, Diamond knows markets. He understands the economy. He's a smart guy. The smartest people in the room seem to basically be saying, "Oh no. This is the canary in the coal mine. This is not actually the mine yet. We haven't hit the mine yet."
Right. All right. Well, I hope my mom listens to this, because she didn't want my dad to sell, and I hope that she feels a little bit better about that decision after hearing you talk like that.
I mean, look, at their as you say, at their age, why are they going to chance that?
Well, that's what I've been saying. I've been saying for a couple of years now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, we thought we were going to wrap on time, but as we always do, we hit a run there and went on long. But that was a fun one. We had a good little crowd in here, but not a very vocal crowd. We had no chat this evening.
Oh,
We did
yeah.
have a decent amount of viewers. So I guess you guys were just a quiet, respectful crowd tonight. We had a very,
Just drinking in our wisdom.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was like a play tonight.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, hit the bell icon so that you get notified when we go live. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and to the audio podcast on any major podcast player. Patreon.com/DoDissidents. DoDissidents.substack.com. Thank you guys all very much for watching. Thanks to our podcast listeners for listening. We will see you guys all next time.